The next person I'd like to invite up onto stage is Vicky, who's going to tell you her real-life story about her and her daughter, Brooke.
Thanks for having me here today. I'm going to tell you the story about my daughter, Brooke Richardson. This story is really hard for me to say, but hopefully this story will help stop your parents having to tell the same story. I'm going to share with you what happened to us on the 4th of December 2012. On that day, my life changed forever. It was a normal day, and our family got up in the morning. Brooke and I had breakfast together, and I made everyone's lunch for the day. At the end of the day, we would all return home and sit down and enjoy a meal together and share our highs and our lows. That day, Brooke made a decision. It would be the last decision of her life. As she was heading to work that day, she was already organising herself, and in her mind, she was thinking about what she had to do. Brooke's downfall was texting and driving. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that mobile phones are bad and that you're all obsessed with them and you spend too much time on them. I'm sure you hear enough of that. Brooke, myself and the rest of my family are huge technology users. I have the last 3 months of messages between Brooke and myself. There are 2,144 messages. That's an average of 25 texts a day, and that is without counting inboxes on Facebook. Now, these are only the messages between Brooke and myself. Brooke, like most young people, was very social, and her family and friends were everything to her. So imagine how many texts she was sending a day. Probably the same amount as you guys. Mobile phones provide us with such a flexibility to interact with others whenever we want, really. But what we need to do is we need to look at what the issues can be if we use them in the wrong places. We need to learn from Brooke's mistake. When driving, mobile phones are such a distraction. It's been described that texting and driving is similar to driving blind. If I'd said to Brooke on that day, now, when you get on that road you know so well, pop on a blindfold, she would have thought that I was crazy. But at 8:27, Brooke sent a text. At 8:31, 000 received a phone call. A young man was reporting a single vehicle crash. He reported that the driver had hit a tree head-on. That tree was on the opposite side of the road, and we were very glad that no one was coming the other way. The next text to Brooke's phone, it was from me. I was in distress, and I was asking her to contact me. At 10 a.m. that morning, I received a phone call that no parent ever wants to receive. Brooke had been killed instantly while texting and driving. I'm standing here today because I don't want other people to receive the same phone call. I cannot explain the pain that I felt at that moment. I ached with every thread of my existence, and I wanted my baby girl back in my world. The next text to Brooke's phone was from me again. I told her that I loved her. She didn't answer. All our lives are busy, but if we're not careful and we don't take the time to stop and think about our actions, then maybe one of our actions could be our last. For every action there is a consequence. Brooke didn't come home for dinner that night, and the place at our table will be empty forever. The low our family experienced that day, I wish on no other family. I get through each day being grateful for having her in my world for 20 years. But really, the sad thing is it should have been so much longer. I know Brooke would want me to apologise for the people that were there that day at the scene. What they saw was nothing short of horrific. Brooke would also want me to thank the emergency services. The dignity and respect that these people give others in these situations is amazing, and as a mother, I thank them. The days that followed were very hazy, and they still are today. What Brooke's dad and I had to do, you do not want your parents to have to do. After someone passes away in a motor vehicle crash, you then have to identify their body. Thankfully, most of Brooke's injuries were internal, because you could imagine what a road trauma is like. I understand that this is very confronting and upsetting for people to hear, but it's real life. This is really what happens. You need to remember, before taking risks on the road, not only texting and driving risks, but all risks as a driver and a passenger. Are you prepared to have this happen to you? So, Brooke's dad and I, we made the long trip down to Melbourne to the coroner's court. For the first time since the accident, we saw Brooke. It was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. And I please ask you, do not be responsible for having someone to do this for you. Once that was over, we came home, but we had to leave Brooke there. She had many examinations. As a mum, all I wanted to do was bring her home with me, but I had to abide with the regulations and she stayed there. On the way home, it hits you, and then you have to organise a funeral. Sadly, when I think back, the time before the accident, I always imagined myself helping Brooke organise a wedding. That will never happen now, and Brooke will never have the joys of having a baby or a family of her own, and that cuts me to the core. When organising the funeral, one thing that was very important to us, and it still is today, that Brooke's life would be celebrated. She was a very bubbly and energetic soul, and she connected with everyone. As a parent, you just want the best for your child. So I decided to do whatever Brooke needed me to do. And I know that she would want me to make sure that this message gets out to the public so that other families don't have to go through this tragic situation. Brooke and I had discussed texting and driving only 12 months before. But to her, she couldn't understand the dangers. Talking doesn't seem to get the message across. What I discussed with her was inconceivable. I have a grave feeling that if this issue isn't raised and taken seriously, like the drink driving and speeding messages, then we may see an epidemic on our roads. What we need to do is turn this message into a common message. I thank you for having me here today and allowing me to tell my story. I was just like everyone else in this room. I thought these things only happened to the people on the news. But they happen to real people. So please listen to my warning. I love my phone. I love chatting and connecting with people. But you need to think, is it an appropriate time? Is it safe? Please either turn your phones off or put them where you're not tempted to touch them. Please just do what you're supposed to be doing, and that is to drive and stay alive. Seriously, using your phone while you're driving is just not worth it. Just think, are you prepared to never see your parents again? Are you prepared to never grow old and have a family of your own? Are you prepared to have your mother crying uncontrollably by your graveside, wanting you back in her world? Thank you.